back over to you.
Okay. So deepening, thanks Don for the introductions. Deepening our analysis, raising up social justice, and naming the extractive economy. So the first feedback we got was, the movement remains in many ways in its own bubble, especially in terms of demographics. In order to build real solidarity with the growing numbers of organizations that are confronting climate change and extractive economies, we must deepen our analysis.
So we'll be reading a few quotes here. The next one is, we need to link social justice, economic dislocation, competing crises, and long emergencies into a single and connected narrative around which people can rally. It can't be simple, but it needs to be a powerful story.
The next quote reads, "Now is a moment when many, many people are suffering from the fragility of our globalized economy. This is an extremely rare, almost unheard of circumstance in which we are collectively prioritizing the well-being of the most vulnerable in our society, both physically and financially, at the expense of economic growth. If we do not seize the opportunity to speak to the relationship between economy, social justice, and climate, we lose the opportunity of engaging millions more people than those who are currently involved in climate activism. We will be hurting our own likelihood of success in addressing climate change, as well as abandoning the most vulnerable members of our society."
Another quote, if we don't deal with climate change, there won't be a planet to live on. But without social justice and equity being strongly represented, we won't have enough humans on board to make it happen. Aggressively unite with allies to share the burdens and victory.
The next quote reads, "Though transition has given me so much, it has been difficult for me to authentically, fully, and deeply endorse and raise up transition because of its blind spots around equity and social justice."
Another respondent said, we need to identify important trends like unhappiness with excessive police force, for example, and state our position in relation to that so that people understand that it is part of our mission as well as those of other organizations. We're particularly missing that when it comes down to social justice issues, which are a root cause for so many of the issues we work to address.
Next one. "We need to embrace similar organizations in a broad tent and present a broad united front. I do think we need a stronger, more attractive messaging and support for local groups to reach out to broaden their constituency to mainstream America, and to market. We need marketing that this united front has answers to most, if not all, of the anxieties faced by millions of Americans. Here we are finding practical local solutions. Join us."
Another quote, I haven't seen Transition US move away from the believers or the choir. It still seems attached to some kind of privilege.
Transition US has not been successful in having an impact outside a largely white, middle-class, mostly middle-aged constituency, certainly in my area.
Another respondent said, Transition US should be willing to address the need to restructure all aspects of current society, which means to confront the reality of white supremacy, capitalism, and patriarchy. And now we're kind of shifting into Marissa's analysis of this feedback, which also has some quotes embedded in it.
Next one, the question of, does the foundation of transition, which include peak oil, climate change, and economic insecurity, still hold true? What was one to which participants generally responded strongly? Oh, that was the question, does the foundation of transition still hold true, was the question which participants generally responded strongly. Some participants said that transition's foundation as a response to peak oil climate change and economic instability still holds true, either completely or absolutely, but more participants expressed that today, the concept of peak oil as one of the primary crises feels mostly irrelevant. While it is still useful to understand, it is not helpful for messaging purposes.
This is still from Marissa and her analysis of the feedback. At the same time, there was a strong call from respondents for Transition US to prioritize social justice or equity in our analysis as one of the crises we face. A few participants specifically suggested replacing peak oil with social justice in our foundational analysis of the crises we face.
There were also calls for strengthening and deepening the way we talk about our economic crisis, shifting from the current framing of economic insecurity/instability to specifically naming the exploitative, extractive, and oppressive values and practices of the dominant economy, as well as the dominant economy's role as a root of both the climate and social crisis we face.
And this is another quote from a respondent, particularly strong one. If we are not able to adapt, grow, and deepen, in particular by integrating social justice and a more critical understanding of the economic crisis into our central mission, transition will likely be replaced by other networks or movements that are more relevant.
Participants highlighted Movement Generation and the Solidarity Economy Network as examples of organizations with clear, compelling, strong narratives, and noted the just transition movement catalyzed by Movement Generation is gaining traction across the United States and around the world, and Transition US might want to consider adopting it.
And the last paragraph here. At the same time, there is likely to be resistance to prioritizing social justice from some existing transition organizers. Many loyal transitioners feel strongly about transition's positive solution-oriented approach, which stands in stark contrast to the myriad protest groups. One survey respondent specifically suggested that transition should be the place for apolitical movements, a safe space for Republicans who see the climate crisis, want to be part of solutions, but who feel uncomfortable in very liberal spaces. Another said, if TUS is going to work on building partnerships, those partnerships should cross partisan lines because that's where we need to be building community. So, that's just kind of refreshing on the feedback that we've received so far. And this meeting here is an extension of that. We're wanting to collect more feedback, more input from the movement around this question of deepening our analysis. And I just briefly want to share a few thoughts that I had about reading this feedback and input. You know, from a personal perspective. I really felt that most of this feedback is pretty spot on. In regards to peak oil, the global peak of conventional oil production was actually predicted with remarkable accuracy. The International Energy Agency's 2017 World Energy Outlook stated that global conventional oil peaked around 2010, when many analysts said that it would. But those same analysts, many of them underestimated the potential for non-conventional fossil fuels like tar sands, shale oil, and fracked gas to more than make up the difference. So as a result, many of the serious disruptions related to peak oil that the transition movement was talking about did not come to pass. Other disruptions did. So I think it does make sense to move on from the peak oil framing, at least for now. I don't think that means we can't talk about peak oil. I think resource depletion remains a significant issue. This is a non-renewable, fossil fuels are a non-renewable resource, but there's many more issues that are more salient to our present than peak oil right now. And I think that this is something widely held throughout the movement. We see it here in the survey, also lots of conversations that I've had over the years. The formulation that peak oil plus climate change equals transition was created back in 2006, 14 years ago now. And since then, many of us have learned increasingly that the crises we are currently facing are much more complex and interconnected than we thought at that time. So I think that there's many more issues kind of circulating around now, but growing inequality is probably the biggest of them. I think we see that in the news, in the world today, in the Black Lives Matter protests and calls for reforms to policing. And we've largely omitted this from our messaging over the past 14 years. So I think it makes complete sense that a lot of people are calling for this, and people have been calling for this for a long time. And not just in response to this current round of strategic planning, but in many, many conversations. Now we have a national social justice working group for transition that is helping us with this. As many commentators have long observed, we will never win the truly sustainable and harmonious world we dream of as long as social and economic injustice continues to persist. And this links directly to a new movement strategy for transition that positions justice as a moral imperative and something that is absolutely essential to our work. While I continue to believe that it is important that transition remain nonpartisan, we also have a responsibility, I believe, to stand up for what we believe in on the basis of shared values and to speak our truth to the world. I think that we owe people that, and I think that most people will really respect us for it. So I could go on and on about this topic. There's so many things to say, but we do want to get to the breakout. So I'll turn it over to Ayako for a few of her thoughts before we do that.
Well, I think you really said it all, but the recent news in the last week or so has really it makes me feel crazy. The special police forces, and I read an article in The Guardian about how the fossil fuel industry is actually funding some of the police forces and donating money. And when my reaction was to just, I'm having a hard time with life, with the news. And my reaction was to really just, I remembered the one analogy I heard in one of the meetings, which is for us to become goo, which, when a butterfly goes from a caterpillar and turns into a metaphor, or, forms a chrysalis, it liquefies itself. And I felt that way. I felt that, and I'm very much a beneficiary of the privileges, that this system. I'm a lawyer. I, like financially, I'm not worried about myself. And, but I felt like I had to go into this goo mode of suspending what I think I know about the world. And I feel like you're with me in going through that transformation. And I really super appreciate Don and Marissa's leadership. Thank you.
Thank you. All right.